We finally got the bear! Bromius came with an incredibly beautiful fable and a pact that will leave your enemies absolutely destroyed. So let's talk about both. Bromius is Soulframe's third Omen beast, a bear who tends the voicing trees of Wevetroot. We're going to cover both his fable and his pact, so if you're looking for info on a specific part of his quest or on how to build and use Bromius's pact, check the chapters below to skip to the part you want to see. The Waste Bear fable used to start by finding a tree with Wevetroot sap to collect, but now will start automatically upon completion of Brewer of Hues, the fable that adds Verminia to your Nightfold. Talking to Verminia will initiate this cutscene, and after some dialogue you can return to Midrath and follow your sparrow to this meeting point. Here Verminia will merge your sparrow with her puppet to create the adorable Floppet, who will be your guide through the rest of this quest. Follow the Floppet to a wounded tree, where another cutscene will give you more clues about Bromius's past, as well as the first note in a 4-note song. From there, the Floppet will take you to the edge of a barrier, and interacting with the purple light here will show you that same musical staff again with the 1 note you've collected so far. The Floppet will then guide you through the forest to find the other wounded trees, and interacting with each one will teach you another note of the song. Once you've collected all 4 notes, return to the barrier and play the song, which allows you to enter the Wevetroot and fight the giant corrupted sproutfolk within. After you defeat him, the Floppet will guide you to this ornate urn. Interacting with it will show you another vision of what befell Bromius, as the voice of a mendicant urges him to drink to excess, and what appears to be a mendicant hand picks up the voicing tree's acorn. When the vision ends, Verminia will confirm that a mendicant has taken the seed, and the Floppet will guide you to its location. Follow your guide and defeat the mendicant knights along the way until you finally find the Wazzard of the Wastes. When you first encounter the Wazzard, he will lock away your pact abilities, forcing you to begin the fight with only your weapon skills. At various points during the battle, he will turn into this withered tree with colored spheres hanging on its bare branches. These spheres correspond to your pact abilities, and you can reclaim one at a time by shooting or throwing your weapon at a sphere. I wanted my torment back, so I shot the red sphere to get my courage ability. The Wazzard primarily uses ranged attacks, but can also turn into a group of corrupted spiders. Killing all of the spiders will force the Wazzard to return so that you can resume your fight. Once the Wazzard is nearly defeated, the withered tree will appear once more. This time you can reach within its trunk to retrieve the acorn. The prompt here isn't especially clear. What you need to do is press the key indicated at the center when the ring is in the highlighted portion of the circle. The highlight is pretty subtle though. I missed it at first even on my second playthrough. I do like this mechanic and wish we could break out of mockery grabs the same way, but I hope they make the visual cue more clear in a future hotfix. Retrieving the voicing seed will cue Verminia to return you to Wevetroot. There she declares the soil of Wevetroot too spoiled for planting and directs you to Neath'uns, where you can confront the root of the corruption. This has become my favorite tile set in Soulframe, and I sincerely hope we get more quests and tales that lead us into these beautiful caverns. Follow the Floppet through Neath'uns until a whiff of sap from Wevetroots gives you one more vision, but it is unclear to me whether we are seeing the past or the future. We are now a figure wearing the Ode Tempest Pact arm, delivering a voicing seed to Synod, the ruler of the Ode. The seed is absolutely massive in our hands during this cutscene, so perhaps this is our past selves when we were still a child. Although the in-game lore tells us that Wevetroot sap gives visions of the future, so the size of the seed may not be a clue here. Either way, our subjugation does not seem voluntary. As chains wrap around our ankles, our perspective returns to Neath'uns, where our vision from the start of the quest comes to pass, and we watch Bromius consume the voicing seed. Fortunately, we have the Floppet to free us, so we can fight the Waste Bear, a Cerberus. This final boss fight is significantly easier now that armor has been fixed, although it can still be tricky if you're not geared well. Aside from his claw swipes, the Waste Bear has 3 special attacks. A ground attack that sends up claws from the earth, a linear attack that sends out damaging vines, and a charge across the arena, after which he cannonballs into the center of the room, dealing damage in a large radius around himself. All of these attacks will stagger you, not just dealing stagger that counts against your stability like normal attacks, but also jostling you out of attacks and animations, and his cannonball animation will also knock stone from the ceiling, staggering you even more if it hits you. At 50% health, he will leap on you and pin you to the ground, which you can thankfully escape much more easily than a mockery. This will remove one of his extra heads, and then the fight will resume. My only issue with this fight now is that the root attack and the ground claw attack can trigger at the same time, making it very difficult to see and thus dodge either one. Fortunately, I was using Garen Rude, so I could heal myself with Torment. I do recommend using a Pact with a healing or survival ability, just in case you get unlucky with the mechanics. Oselda, Garen Rude, and Ode Tempest are likely the easiest options, although you could also manage fairly well by using Siren's Trick of the Light to draw his roots away from you. With Bromius's extra heads defeated, there's only one thing left to do. Pilot the Floppet through his digestive tract to ensure he expels the voicing seed. Your envoy will return to Nightfold with the seed, and there you can use the song you recovered to plant the seed and bring new growth to the voicing trees. A return to Wevetroot will show you both Bromius and the soil healed by your efforts, and the Floppet will guide you through planting fallen acorns. Finally, talk to Bromius and offer him some reassurance. The response you choose here will give you a permanent bonus to the virtue associated with your choice, just like the choice in Orengal's questline. Once again, I'm not a huge fan of permanent choices like this, especially when neither what you're choosing nor the fact that it is permanent is explained to the player. Fortunately, a single virtue point isn't going to make a huge difference in your builds, so you can safely pick whichever answer you like best. Still, I do hope we get the option to replay these fables in the future, and in so doing change our choices. Enjoy the absolutely gorgeous ending of this fable, and you will wake up in your Nightfold next to your wolf pup. Poppet and Sparrow finally separate, and now you can head to Tuvolcane, who will have Bromius's Pact ready for you to craft. This is going to cost you 15 moronite, among other materials, so if you don't have enough, head to the Crypt of the Circade to loot coffers, the Glades of Andron to loot rare chests, or check Avocat's inventory, since he does have a random chance to sell sapphire or moronite, and his crafting material inventory refreshes every 3 hours. So now that we've got Bromius's Pact, let's find out how it works and talk about how to build it. Bromius's first ability is Rump Thump, which will cause you to leap into the air and then slam down on the ground, dealing damage and stagger to enemies near where you land. The casting time for this ability is pretty long, but seems to make enemies stumble back as you jump. The leap will always send you straight up in the air, and while you can choose the direction you move in when you slam down towards the ground, there is a fixed maximum range to that movement. The damage radius for Rump Thump's attack does not seem to scale with grace, but is quite large regardless. The stagger radius is even bigger than the damage radius and does not seem to scale either. The amount of damage and stagger dealt by Rump Thump primarily scales with your total armor rating. This does take defense totems into account, which has some interesting implications we'll get to later on. Rump Thump's damage also benefits from courage scaling, but this matters much less than your total armor. Bromius's second ability is Wevetroot. This sends out a path of vines that damage and entangle enemies in its path. The width of the vines seems to be fixed and is larger than where the vines appear on your screen. Entangled enemies will be drawn into the center line and held there. The damage dealt by the vines scales with courage, and the length of the path does scale with grace, but the difference is fairly small. The vines last for 8 seconds, and this does not seem to scale. Bromius's third ability is Song of Growth. This functions as an aura, buffing armor for everyone within range of the song. The range scales with your grace, but like Wevetroot, the difference is not very impactful since the base range is plenty large for most fights. I'm not sure exactly how much of an armor buff you get from Song of Growth since the numbers don't show up in your arsenal, but we do know that it scales with courage because of how it affects the damage of Rump Thump. The song's duration scales with spirit, but once again this scaling is very weak. The only indications that Song of Growth is active are the audio cue and the blue glow around your envoy. These are both pretty subtle, but the ability goes on cooldown as soon as it runs out, so the easiest way to see if you have the buff is to check if the ability is recharging. Bromius's unique Pact upgrades are Bark Bear, which gives you a chance of stealing armor when you attack an enemy, and Canopy's Blessing, which is supposed to reflect some damage back at attackers and doesn't seem to work. So, like every Pact right now, except Mora's Hand, hilariously enough, Bromius scales best with courage, and there's no denying that a full courage melee build is a happy place for Bromius. However, Bromius scales much more strongly with armor than with courage, so strongly that with the right gear, you can build this Pact effectively for any virtue you like. In fact, the optimal equipment for Bromius is not melee weapons at all, but rather magic weapons and flyblades, because these allow you to equip extra defense totems when you have Archstorm, their rune, which boosts your total armor rating even higher. On this build, I'm wearing Arbearer's Mask, which you get from Cabocha, Wazzard's Wish, which you get from the Wraith of Wastes, Mockery Douthrot and Mockery Binds, which you get from Thrice-Bound Impid, and I'm using Precles for my sidearm and Odiak for my main weapon, both with the Archstorm rune and Double Duck defense totems, but you could replace Precles with Skilter and Odiak with either Gwilyn or the Erstroot. This brings my total armor rating to 111. Now, I certainly could use Blessed Joinery to attune Odiak to Courage, and while that would make this build even stronger, it's really not necessary. Here I am using a full Spirit build with no points in Courage at all. I maxed out Bark Bear for even more armor, took points in Akin for cooldown reduction, and even took Sympathy for healing, although I don't end up needing it very often because everything just dies. I have enough armor that Rump Thump does a tremendous amount of damage, and casting Song of Growth before I Rump Thump makes it deal even more damage. But wouldn't a Courage build double dip on that damage boost thanks to the scaling on Song of Growth? Well, yes, but what difference does it make if my enemies are already dead? With only 8 Courage, the lowest I can get on this character while using Bromius, I can still annihilate an entire group of enemies by precasting Song of Growth and slamming them with Rump Thump. This Pact is just incredibly strong, and you can comfortably run it with any virtue setup you like. Here I am using it on a full Grace build with Thistle. I precast Song of Growth, open with Wevetroot so I actually have a chance to take a few shots with my bow, and then as soon as my enemies close on me, I Rump Thump them to death. So all you really need to have fun with Bromius is armor, and this got me thinking about virtues and virtue scaling in Soulframe so far. I've heard people argue quite often in the Soulframe community that Courage scaling is overpowered compared to Spirit and Grace, and while I do agree that Courage is the strongest right now, I also feel that it's premature to draw greater conclusions about this system based on its current iteration. I really like the general concept of Soulframe's virtue scaling, and I think ability strength, duration, and range are good attributes to align with our virtues, but I do have a lot of questions about how Digital Extremes wants to see those virtues shape our gameplay. Right now, for almost all pacts, the base values for strength, duration, and range are good enough that you can use any pact with any virtue and be successful. Your skill as a player and understanding of the game's mechanics matter more than your build, and I'm not sure this is a bad thing. I like my Graceful Bear Bromius build, and I like that it's viable even if it isn't technically the strongest. I do think the buildcraft would be more interesting if we had stronger incentive to invest our points in each of the virtues, but how would that affect new envoys with few virtue points to spend? Ultimately, I think Soulframe's virtue and pact system has a ton of potential, and I'm very curious about where DE wants to go with it. We know a balance pass is coming, and I think that will give us our first true sense of what Soulframe's future builds will look like. For now, we have the luxury of being able to pair whatever weapons we want with whatever pacts we want, so let's enjoy it. If you found this video helpful or interesting, please remember to toss it a like and subscribe for more Soulframe content. What's your favorite pact and weapon combo? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, happy hunting!